Hi, Dan Lyle here, the owner and founder of LylePublishing.com. And I'd like to briefly tell you how that I might help you with the difficult, big problem of unenthusiastic youth by best meeting their legitimate spiritual needs. Now, the sad situation is that in many congregations, when their youth get old enough to go out on their own, many of them quit. And here they were raised from babies in this particular religious group. They heard thousands of sermons. They sat in hundreds of religious classes. They interacted with the individual members year after year. And yet they happily walk away and never come back. Why? Well, there are many reasons given for this phenomenon, which actually cuts across most religious groups in the modern day world. Yet, even though all of these various reasons given may contribute some to congregations losing their own youth and being unable to attract replacement youth, many times forgotten is the actual number one reason for this happening. And what is that? Well, I suggest it is far and above the number one reason, above all those other things that are blamed for this. And that is failing to meet the legitimate spiritual needs of young people. Now, speaking as a Christian, the New Testament scriptures depict Jesus as being very receptive to young people, and who in turn were fascinated by him. And indeed, the radical, loving, and liberating Jesus of the New Testament versus the stodgy, hateful, and dictatorial church hierarchy of his day was a breath of fresh air in a stifling religious environment to everyone, but especially to young people. A major thesis of my book, In Search of Quality, Principles and Mechanisms, from a religious perspective, is that Christians today should not only believe what Jesus taught, but also do as Jesus did. And if they did this, they might be much more successful in all of their endeavors, including attracting and keeping young people. But to fail to do as Jesus did is a guaranteed recipe for repelling and losing one's young people. And just what was it that Jesus did that was so amazing to everyone, particularly to young people? Namely, he found good, acceptable ways to meet the legitimate spiritual needs of his followers. And these were practical, effective, and specific methods, which I claim are laid out step by step in my books, Creative Theology and In Search of Quality, Principles and Mechanisms. So, you see, I'm not offering to you the Lyle Youth Program. Now, if you want helpful booklets and materials for a youth program or for a youth Bible study series, then there are many websites that do that. I'm offering something different. what I'm offering is the enabling methodology to deliberately, mindfully, and systematically meet the legitimate spiritual needs of your young people. And this is far deeper and far more meaningful than a youth program. Now, you may think that you are already doing this, but let me say this. If you cannot attract many or any young people from your community, and if, sadly, you are losing your own children once they get out on their own, then you are not meeting their legitimate spiritual needs, or as fully as you need to. Now, to do so may require you to think differently and consider different things than you're used to considering. And it may require you to implement what I call quality principles and mechanisms that are somewhat outside of your usual beliefs, doctrines, and traditions. But, if these so-called new things are really old things that come from Jesus, or from the founder of other faiths if you're from some other faith, why would that be a bad thing? If it really did keep your own young people from leaving and really did attract other young people to be part of your group. After all, what do you have that is more important than your own young people? Isn't it worth stretching your mind a little bit to keep them? And what would you give to, instead of having sullen, bored, and miserable kids that you have to drag to church or beat them over the head to get them to come to church, if instead of that you had happy, engaged, enthusiastic kids that would drag you to church when you didn't feel quite like going? What would you give to have something like that? Well, it could happen. But it does require two things. Number one, that your church leadership knows the legitimate spiritual needs of your young people. And number two, it puts into place good, acceptable ways to meet those legitimate concerns and needs. And in my book, The Real Jesus, I describe the New Testament Jesus as advocating the following key 7 things. Now, please consider this. Number 1, extreme teachings versus solidified dogmas. Number 2, spiritual struggle versus boring stagnation. Number 3, personal connections versus comforting traditions. Number 4, godly quality management versus suppressive dictatorship. Number 5, relishing the adventure versus fearful retrenchment. Number 6, helpful sacrifice versus fearful retrenchment. And number 7, God obsession versus rituals and ceremonies. The 7 characteristics I just mentioned of the real Jesus are all things that young people relate very well too, if they are presented in the context of meeting the young people's legitimate spiritual needs. So if you have some interest in what I'm telling you, then I invite you to take a look at other free short videos that I've made in which I take you on quick tours through the contents of each of the books that I mentioned. You can look and see for yourself what's in them. And links to those short videos are located right above the pictures of my e-covers that you just seen on my home webpage at lylepublishing.com. And then, if you're interested in pursuing the details, my books are available for purchase for a mere $10 each to pop up right into your computer for your immediate use. Now, should you need or want direct consultation from me, then for a reasonable negotiated fee, I may be able to work with you via continuing email, video conferencing, or in person. Also, for free, you are welcome to send me a query-type email describing your situation, and as soon as I'm able, I'll get back to you with helpful feedback. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, either now or in the future, please feel free to directly email me at danlyle@lylepublishing.com. I look forward to hearing from you if you wish, and I thank you for viewing my Enthusing Your Youth by Meeting Their Legitimate Spiritual Needs Creative Theology video.